Of the 6,000 foreign students at Harvard, 1,000 is from China.
Wow.
And most of them, I think, are children of government officials, or they're tied to the government officials one way or the other, unless they would not be able to come to Harvard. And ordinary...
Tied to American government officials?
No, U.S.
Chinese
government officials. The Chinese students study at Harvard. They're not ordinary Chinese students. They come from privileged Chinese families.
Yet these people who are top government officials in China are able to read the tea leaves or see the forest for the trees, whatever analogy you want to use, to realize that they're not in an optimal, ideal system in China. They need to send their people to the U.S.
Yeah. Their kids, their grandkids are educated at top schools in the U.S. Columbia, Harvard.
Yeah.
Harvard is their favorite choice. Harvard is a Chinese party school. Not party school like having fun party school, but CCP, Chinese Communist Party School, Central Party School, because they have a program with the CCP to educate. The Harvard Kennedy School had a program to educate, to train CCP government officials. So they're like the Central Party School. So that's why they're so ideologically intertwined with China.
That's
fascinating. You don't even know how communist the Harvard University has become. I have a friend who went to the Kennedy School about 15 years ago. He's Chinese, and he said, "This is the stuff I hear here is no different from the stuff you would hear in China at the CCP's Central Party School." He said, "This place is as communist as you can imagine." That's why, they're into so much trouble right now with this U.S. government. Because it's certainly not in the best interest of the America.
Isn't Harvard, I might be wrong, but there was a guy, you're familiar with Charles Lieber?
Oh, yeah, he's the head of the chemistry department, and he was sued.
Was that at Harvard?
Yeah, Harvard. He was sued by the U.S. Justice Department, right, for espionage, doing espionage work for China.
Yeah, exactly. I believe the story is he was working with two younger students from China, and he was caught getting paid a huge sum of money, in the millions of dollars, from China. And Steve, maybe you can find the actual report so we don't fuck this up too much. But then he went to prison, and I just read a report that they just let him out, and China hired him full time. So now he was living in China, working there full time. And he's a nanobiologist. Here it is. Charles Lieber, former Harvard University professor, was arrested on January 28, 2020 on charges of making false statements to U.S. law enforcement and federal funding agencies about his involvement with China's 1,000 Talents Plan and the Wuhan University of Technology. He was charged with lying about his affiliation with the 1,000 Talent Plan and the Wuhan University of Technology, as well as failing to report income he received from Wuhan. He was convicted on December 21st, 2021 and sentenced on April 26, 2023 to time served, 2 days in prison, 2 years of supervised release with 6 months of home confinement, $50,000 fine, blah, blah, blah. Since his arrest, he has been actively seeking employment in China. So there's no report here about the latest news of him actually getting hired full-time by China and like getting a huge contract.
Yeah, he's in China. He's not alone. I wouldn't be surprised if there are more of him here in the U.S.
This also mentions nothing about the foreign nationals or the Chinese nationals that came here that he was working with.
That's why the State Department announced that they're going to revoke student visas for Chinese students.
They did?
Yeah. I mean, Mark Rubio just announced a few days ago that they're going to review or revoke some student visas given to Chinese students. Because even they're not professional spies. But if the government asks you to do something for them while you study in the U.S., are you going to say no?
Right.
Your parents still there.
If your parents are still there, that's an interesting dynamic. What is this, Steve? The Harvard Crimson? Ex-Harvard chemist Charles Lieber joins Chinese University. Go to the first chapter or paragraph there. Former Harvard chemistry professor Charles Lieber, can you zoom in a little bit? Who was convicted of lying to federal authorities about his ties to China in 2011, took a new job as professor at the Chinese University last week. Wow.
But you know what? I think his life in China will be difficult because that doesn't necessarily mean that the Chinese are going to trust him. You know,
even if they paid him millions of dollars, I'm sure they're going to be wary of his. Yeah.
The leftist Chinese are now saying that they shouldn't trust any students who studied in the West because they could be spying for the West in China.
Right. And if they knew any, I mean, I'm sure they know. You have to anticipate that if this guy is being released from supervision from the federal government in the U.S. and they're getting, we see that China's going to pay you this much money to come do this. Well, guess what? Now you have to spy for us when you go to China. And I'm sure that China would anticipate something like that happening.
So the Chinese students are really stuck because the Chinese enterprises, government agencies are not hiring Chinese students who were educated in the West for fear of espionage. Okay. And then they're not welcomed here either.
So if you are a government official in China, top level big shot in China in the government, in the CCP, and you send your child here to Harvard to work here, you're basically kissing your kid goodbye because he's never going to be allowed to come back and work in China, right?
Well, if you're a big shot in the Chinese government, of course your kid is going to graduate from Harvard,
right,
and then go back to China and have a lot easier life there. You know,
and they wouldn't be worried about the kid being
if his parents is somebody holding important positions.
Okay.
I'm talking about the students whose parents are just ordinary people.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
You know, the latest news, there was a news that went viral in China. There was a student who studied.
You all right over there, Steve?
Yeah, I'm eating at Tom's.
Oh.
There was a student who spent 8 years studying in the West, in the U.S., who went back to China. And this guy is extremely patriotic, quote unquote patriotic. He even studied Marxist books when he was in the U.S. so that he could understand the communist theories. That's how patriotic, that's how pro-CCP he is.
Okay.
So after graduation, he went back to China to continue his graduate study. Now, he got into trouble because he went to Tiananmen Square for an event. It was something, you know. He was supposed to go there with a friend, but the friend didn't show up. While there, he was detained by the police because the police thought that he was causing trouble. You know, the police thought that he was a petitioner. You know how Chinese petitioners, you know, disgruntled workers, you know, who want to go to Tiananmen Square to petition, you know, for their whatever, you know. So he was arrested by the police because they thought he was with the petitioners. But he wasn't. But what happened was he was showing sympathy towards these people. You know, he stepped up and asked the police to be nicer to these poor men who were there seeking justice. And so the police arrested him. And then after much, you know, investigation, they realized he wasn't with them. They released him. And then, but at school, the school dispelled him, discharged him. I mean, it was Tsinghua University. It was not a random school. It's one of the best schools in China. The school discharged him on grounds that he got into trouble. He showed sympathy towards someone he's not supposed to help.
Wow.
Just like that. All you did is just say, hey, tell the police, hey, you know, you shouldn't mistreat this old man. You know, come on. That's all he did in public. The school discharged him. The guy committed suicide. The young man he jumped. He's such a patriotic young man. Because think about it. He spent 8 years in the West. He he has accepted Western values, right? He spoke up when he saw injustice. All he did was tell the police to be nice to the man, and he was arrested. The school immediately saw him as a troublemaker. Now, if he wouldn't be discharged if he didn't study in the West. His misbehavior plus his Western education was the problem. That combination is the problem. So you see how dangerous Western education can be. And of course, if this guy's father or mother is a big shot, and he could call up his parents or grandparents and say, hey, help, I need help.
Yeah.
And they could solve the problem for him,
Right.
but he's probably an ordinary person,
Right.
So, but he committed suicide. It became a viral event because everyone was saying, well, what did he do wrong?
He was so committed to the CCP and the
He
ideology.
studied Marxist works in the U.S. Just so that he understand what communism is all about. And he vowed to serve his country as soon as he graduated here and returned to China.
Wow.
Look what happened to him.